Right now, someone is in charge of your day, a boss whose mood decides whether your week is easy or brutal, a name at the top of an org chart you never drew. You have opinions about that person. Most of them quietly are complaints. Now, imagine that person is just gone. No replacement, no handover. For most of human history, that was not a disaster. It was the normal shape of every day. For hundreds of thousands of years, no one was in charge at all. And anyone who tried got a very different response than a promotion. Start with what everyone assumes. The story you were handed goes like this. Ancient humans were weak and confused without a strong leader. So they followed the biggest man, the fiercest hunter, the alpha. He gave orders and the group survived because of him. Lose that leader, and the group falls into chaos and dies. It's a clean story. It is also almost entirely backwards. Christopher Boehm spent his career testing that story against the evidence. He was an anthropologist who directed the Jane Goodall Research Center in California. In 1999, he published a book called Hierarchy in the Forest. In it, he surveyed dozens of hunter-gatherer societies across the whole planet. He was hunting for one thing: the permanent boss, the chief who commands the band the way a manager commands a team. Across that entire global survey, he kept finding the same result: the boss wasn't there. 19th century European explorers hit the same wall. They would walk into a foraging band and ask to speak to the chief. The people would look at them, confused. There was no chief. No one gave orders that everyone had to obey. No one held rank over anyone else. The explorers found this almost impossible to believe. They were so certain a leader must exist, they assumed he was being hidden from them. Here's the part that flips the whole thing over. These groups were not leaderless because they could not organize. They were leaderless on purpose. They worked hard, every day, to stay that way. Boehm gave the mechanism a name. He called it the reverse dominance hierarchy. In a normal hierarchy, one strong person dominates everyone below. In a reverse dominance hierarchy, everyone below bands together to dominate the one strong person. The group becomes the boss, and its permanent job is making sure no single human ever becomes one. You already know how this feels. Think about the coworker who starts acting like he owns the place. The one who orders people around, takes the credit, decides he is above the rest. Notice what happens to him. The eye rolls, the jokes behind his back, the quiet way the room stops cooperating with him. That instinct to cut down the person who rises too high is ancient. Boehm found the exact same instinct running in every forager society he studied. And it runs deeper than our species. Watch a chimpanzee troop and you see the raw version of it. A single alpha male dominates the group and takes what he wants. But the lower-ranking males don't just accept him forever, they form alliances. 2 or 3 weaker males band together and unseat the alpha they could never beat alone. Frans de Waal spent years documenting exactly this in his book, Chimpanzee Politics. Boehm looked at that and saw the seed of something: the urge to gang up against a bully who has grown too powerful. He argued it is so old that it helps explain modern democracy itself. We didn't invent the idea of resisting a tyrant. We inherited it from an ancestor who was pulling down alphas millions of years ago. There's a famous example of the machinery in action. Richard Lee was an anthropologist living with the hoansi people of the Kalahari. For a Christmas feast, he bought the group the largest, fattest ox he could find. He expected them to be grateful. Instead, they mocked it. They called it a bag of bones. They joked that they would have to eat the horns because there was no meat on it. Lee was hurt and confused. The ox was enormous, so he asked a man named Tommaso why they had insulted such a generous gift. The answer is one of the most important things ever recorded about human nature. When a young man kills much meat, Tommaso said, he comes to think of himself as a big man. He starts to think of the rest of us as his inferiors. We cannot accept this. So we speak of his meat as worthless. This way we cool his heart and make him gentle. And then Tommaso said the line that matters most. We refuse the one who boasts, because someday his pride will make him kill somebody. They were not being rude for fun. They were running a system. Anthropologists call it a leveling mechanism. Every time someone did something impressive, the group deflated his ego on purpose. Not out of jealousy, out of survival, because they understood something we keep forgetting. The person who feels superior starts to feel entitled to command. And the person who commands starts to feel entitled to hurt. So the group killed the ego before it could grow into a crown. Mockery, teasing, the refusal to praise. These were not bad manners. They were the immune system of an equal society. And when the ego kept growing anyway, that immune system had a final, brutal setting. Boehm found that foragers around the world used the same last resort against a true tyrant. They killed him. Not in a rage, in a decision. The group would quietly agree that a man had become too dangerous to keep alive. Often they chose an executioner in advance, usually one of the man's own relatives. He would end it by ambush, and the whole community stood behind the act. Boehm recorded one case among the Baruya people. A man had seized his neighbor's livestock and forced their wives into sex. He had turned himself into a small king, so his own people killed him. This was not lawlessness. It was the opposite. It was the law of a society that had decided no single person gets to rule the rest. We may even have a picture of it. On a rock wall at Remedia in eastern Spain, there is an ancient painted scene. A row of figures stands over a single figure on the ground. Archaeologists have long read it as an execution. The group gathered, carrying out a sentence together. If insults did not work, the group escalated. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, the response to a bossy person is simple. Frank Marlowe, who studied them for years, described it. If someone tries to tell everyone what to do, the others just ignore him. They act as if he has not spoken. And if he keeps pushing, the group has one final move. They pick up their things and walk away. The whole camp relocates and leaves the would-be boss standing alone. You can't rule people who can just leave, and this instinct did not fade with contact. Government officials and missionaries who came to the Hadza tried to give them orders too. They were met with the same response every upstart got. The Hadza ignored them or drifted away exactly as they had for thousands of years. That's the quiet genius of the whole arrangement. A forager band was never a fixed structure. It was fluid. Families joined and split off with the seasons. If you didn't like how a camp was run, you left and joined another. This is sometimes called voting with your feet. It made domination almost impossible. Any leader who got too heavy woke up to find his followers had vanished in the night. So how did anything actually get decided? If no one was in charge, who chose where to camp, when to move, how to settle a fight? They talked it out. The whole group, together, until they agreed, everyone talked and talked. Decisions came out of long, winding public discussion until the group drifted towards something everyone could live with. Megan Biselet watched this happen among the hoansi in the 1970s. She recorded one dispute the group called the problem of the deserted husband. A marriage had fallen apart and it tangled several families together. The discussions ran for months. No one banged a gavel. No one took a vote and crushed the losing side. People talked, argued, and compromised until they reached something everyone could live with. The solution was messy and imperfect, and that was the point. Another anthropologist, George Silberbauer, described the danger the group was steering between. On one side, a band could collapse into total dependence on one strong voice. On the other, it could shatter into everyone doing whatever they wanted. Consensus was the narrow path between those two ways of dying. The talking continued until the disagreement wore itself down into a solution. Leadership existed, but it was temporary and slippery. The best tracker led the hunt, then went back to being ordinary. The woman who knew the water sources led the march to water. Authority followed knowledge, and it evaporated the moment the task was done, so a kind of leader could exist. But look closely at what these societies wanted in one. Boehm noticed something strange in the record. When foragers described a good leader, they described him almost entirely by what he was not overbearing, not boastful, not aloof, not grabbing for more than his share. A person could guide the group, but only as long as he never seemed to want to. The moment a leader started giving orders instead of suggestions, the old machinery switched on. The mockery, the ignoring, the walking away, the ambush at the far end. Leadership was allowed. Ruling never was. Now think about the hidden cost of the story we were told. The "we needed a strong leader" story is not just wrong about the past, it quietly teaches you that hierarchy is natural and permanent. That someone being above you is simply how humans are built. But your ancestors spent an ocean of time proving the opposite. For 95% of the human story, nobody was above anybody. Equality was not a dream. It was the default setting, then something changed, and we can watch the exact moment it started to break. In 1955, quarry workers near Vladimir in Russia uncovered a burial. The site is called Sunghir, and it is around 34,000 years old. Inside were the graves of an older man and two children buried head to head. What was on them stopped archaeologists cold. The bodies were covered in thousands of beads carved from mammoth ivory. The two children alone wore more than 10,000 of them. Each bead took roughly 45 minutes to carve. The clothing on those 3 bodies represented something like 10,000 hours of human labor. Sit with that number. 10,000 hours of a group's effort poured into decorating 3 people for the ground. For hundreds of thousands of years, no human was buried like this. Everyone went into the earth roughly equal. Then suddenly, 3 individuals are singled out and drowned in wealth. This is one of the first times in the entire record that we see it. The beginning of the idea that some people are worth more than others. Sunghir is not alone. Around the same era, at Dolní Věstonice in the Czech basin, archaeologists found more of these lavish burials. Isolated individuals laid out in theatrical poses, buried under piles of ornaments. For 100,000 years before this, graves were plain and roughly equal. Then, in a narrow window of the Ice Age, a handful of bodies suddenly get treated like royalty. And remember who was doing the carving. In these societies, children made up somewhere between 40 and 65% of the people. Whole families spent staggering amounts of their short lives producing beads for a few special corpses. Something in how humans valued each other had started to shift, and there is a darker detail. The older man at Sunghir did not die peacefully. When Eric Trinkhaus and Alexandra Buzulova re-examined his skeleton, they found a cut into his neck vertebra. His throat had been opened and he died from it. We don't know his story. We can't know if he was a victim, a leader, or something in between. But this is the very site where we first see one human raised far above the rest. And here we also find a blade at a throat. That pairing is not an accident of one grave. It is the whole story in miniature. For most of human existence, we did not fear the loss of a leader. We feared the arrival of one. Every band kept a watch running against the person who might rise up and rule. And they were right to, because look at what happened after Sunghir. Once a few people could be raised above the rest, the brakes came off. The princely burials multiply. Then farming arrives and lets people hoard grain, land, and power in one place. The leveling mechanisms that had held for 100,000 years stopped working. You cannot pick up your camp and walk away from a king who owns the only fields. The reverse dominance hierarchy, the thing that kept us equal, quietly collapsed. And we have been living inside its ruins ever since. But here's the part that is actually about you. That ancient watchfulness did not disappear when the kings arrived. It's still running inside you right now. It's the flash of resentment when someone pulls rank they didn't earn. It's the reflex to mock the arrogant and root for the powerful to fall. It's the discomfort you feel around a person who thinks he's better than you. That's not pettiness. That's a 2 million-year-old alarm, built by people who knew that unchecked power gets someone killed. There is a strange grief hidden in all this. Your ancestors built the most stable social technology in human history. A way of living where no one owned anyone and everyone had a voice. It held for longer than anything we've made since, and it worked because the group would never let one person become the boss. So go back to that name at the top of your org chart. The manager, the boss, the one who signs off on your days. The strange thing isn't that you sometimes resent them. The strange thing is that you obey them at all. For almost all of human history, the group would have gently, firmly cut that person back down to your size. You come from 100,000 years of people who refused to be ruled. The quiet voice in you that bristles at being bossed around isn't a flaw. It is the oldest, truest part of who you are, still whispering that no one was ever meant to be above you.